All right, good morning. I hope everybody enjoyed last evening, the dinner and the entertainment and an introduction to some of the culture, the informal culture of this island. I wanted to provide you with a couple of reminders before we have this morning's keynote. One is that this session is being live streamed, and if you could turn off or put on silent your cell phones if you haven't already, we'd appreciate it. And also for those people that are watching the live streaming, a couple of reminders. One, after this keynote address, we will be having a half-an-hour break between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. But the live streaming will continue during that break, and we'll reconvene at 10 o'clock for a panel, and it's a very interesting panel on how small islands, especially in the Caribbean and elsewhere, respond creatively to extreme events and disasters like the hurricanes. So there will be a live streaming through those two events, and then again this evening at the public forum starting at 7:30 p.m. it will also be live streamed. So we're looking forward to having participation here in the audience, and then any comments that are coming in from live streaming, we will take those and respond to those afterwards too. A reminder as well that the hashtag Island Stories is still active. There have been apparently a lot of comments that have been put using that hashtag. And if you go to Facebook, the Island States, Island Territories Facebook, you can also post things to that Facebook. And one last comment, and that is you may have noticed at the registration desk that they are selling water bottles, and those water bottles are $15 US, but all the money that is collected from those water bottles, the sale of those water bottles, goes to the student fund here, Student Development Fund. So not only are you able to be environmentally conscious by having a water bottle, but you contribute toward the student fund as well. And with that as housekeeping, I'd like to call Ms. Geneve Phillip-Durham up, who will introduce our guest speaker for today, this morning.
Good morning again, everyone. Mrs. Leona Romeo Marlin is currently the Prime Minister of St. Martin, a position she has held since January 2018. As Prime Minister, she holds the responsibility for the Ministry of General Affairs as well, where she promotes cooperation between the partners within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, French St. Martin, Caribbean overseas countries and territories, and CARICOM. Prior to this, she served as a Member of Parliament subsequent to St. Martin being granted autonomy within the Kingdom of the Netherlands in 2010. Since her appointment, she has been charged with the responsibility to steer and support the implementation of St. Martin's National Recovery and Resilience Plan, a policy initiative which became necessary following the passage of Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. For those of you who would have witnessed the devastation of these hurricanes, either firsthand or via portrayals in the media, I'm sure you would appreciate that the leadership and stewardship of any country in the aftermath of an environmental disaster of those magnitudes would be critical to the recovery and building efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to join me in welcoming a true patriot, an advocate for Caribbean regional integration, and someone who ably, gracefully, and diplomatically maneuvers and traverses a post-disaster governance landscape. Prime Minister, the Honorable Leona Romeo Marlin.
I smile. It's a personal smile between Geneve and myself. A pleasant good morning to one and all, the Honorable Prime Minister of Aruba, Ms. Evelyn Cruz, Waver of Waver Cruz. I always like to put the maiden name first, Romeo Marlin. Mr. Jim Randall, today, a special thank you also to Geneve. She knows how I got here, and I'm forever grateful for her input. I stand here before you in representation of the people of St. Martin, and particularly in this context where to share the experience based on the theme sharing stories of island life. It is therefore my honor to present this keynote address on the character of resilient nations which have the ability to rise in the face of paralyzing odds during this first international conference on island states, island territories, here on the lovely island of Aruba, one happy island. And in the native tongue of this wonderful island, my kingdom partner, bon dia and bon bini natur hindi presente, which means good morning and welcome to one and all. September 2017. A month and a year the Caribbean region will never forget. As one of the harshest hurricanes recorded in history to date that left St. Martin and many other neighboring countries in a state of paralysis. Although some of the islands did not experience the immediate physical impact of this natural disaster, the region was collectively affected by the destruction which triggered the disassembling of our social, economic, and humanitarian condition. The world mourned along with St. Martin and all islands that were affected by Hurricane Irma and Maria. Although placed in the state of peril and destruction, the instinctual demand of resiliency propelled our leaders and our people into a state of survival, which now forms a testament to many in our record-breaking ability to recover. We use the term resilient very often. It has almost become part of our name. No more St. Martin, the friendly island, but St. Martin, the resilient island, or St. Martin, a place where resilient people live. Now, what is this resiliency? And what is it to be resilient? From the Google search, it states, and I quote, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. Resilience refers to the ability to successfully adapt to stressors, maintaining psychological well-being in the face of adversity, its ability to bounce back from difficult experiences. Resilience is not a trait that people either have or don't have. Resilient people are able to utilize their skills and strength to cope and recover from problems and challenges. These problems may include natural disasters. Resilient people face life's difficulties head-on. This does not mean that they experience less distress or grief or anxiety than other people do. It means that they handle such difficulties in ways that foster strength and growth. In many cases, they emerge even stronger than they were before, unquote. I had to look that up because it depicts the characteristics of the 114 plus nationalities that make up the population of St. Martin. St. Martin is a beacon of hope for them. So are we resilient people? I can firmly state yes, due to the fact that we had no other choice in order for us to overcome. When I look at St. Martin's strength, immediately after Hurricane Irma, St. Martin, by the grace of God, began its recovery process within a matter of days. Communications lines were restored due to the assistance and cooperation from our sister island of Curacao. Our power plant, GEBE, was functional and immediately continued its service, which played a significant role in this recovery process. The governing apparatus continued its services and were able to provide free internet access to the entire community at the government building, allowing persons to be able to let their loved one know that they survived. The hospital remained active despite major damages. The business community resumed its activities, aiding the community with necessary household essentials, For instance, there was a bakery located in the most populated area of the island which shared freshly baked bread to the community, a maximum of 1 per person, free of charge for several weeks. Although the lines were long, the store owners were committed to provide help in a time of need. We know of the looting that went on, so grocery stores were scared to open, but when they did, imagine lines just to get water, flour, candles, basic items because they were scarce. People from all levels of society had to stand in line to be served. Our regular norm to grocery shopping was limited with a certain amount per household. Yes, that was all of our reality. Community cleanups and homes were being carried out immediately after the storm by the community. Neighbors helped each other in most cases. Evacuation of the most vulnerable groups, children, senior citizens, and the physically impaired, supported by many local and foreign volunteers. This was assisted by our sister island of Aruba, who took on our kidney patients. Curacao assisted with others, both allowing our kids to continue their education in their respective country. Schools reopened, although in damaged stage, social relief were granted, enabling parents to continue with the process of recovery and rebuilding. Though critiqued, I thought that was a brilliant move as it gave our kids a sense of normalcy. Safety was restored within short through the assistance of Aruba and Curacao and the Netherlands. Within 2 weeks, our core of basic needs were restored, such as electricity, water, and basic food supplies. Our maritime and aviation sectors prevailed despite infrastructural shortcomings, allowing the import of humanitarian emergency supplies, equipment, and most importantly, the evacuation of the special needs patients, elderly, children, and the relocation of tourist visitors with the help of foreign partners. The former Prime Minister of Aruba and Dominica personally found their way to St. Martin to cater to the needs of their countrymen while providing additional support to the country as a whole. The overwhelming level of support from all countries near and far were not to be matched. From this, on behalf of the people of St. Martin, I continue to offer my deepest and endless gratitude to every one of you, as you have held us in your prayers and thoughts, but have also matched your benevolence with your kind deeds. Many of you have heard that St. Martin is receiving 470 million euros from the Netherlands. Many envied St. Martin, as no other country in the region was to receive this amount of money right after a devastating storm. Well, for those who didn't understand, as even today, many think that those monies will trickle down to a check in their hands or that the process is an overnight process. Allow me to take this opportunity to clarify. These monies were secured in a recovery trust fund for St. Martin, financed by the Netherlands and managed by the World Bank, and implemented by the government of St. Martin as the beneficiary. As of today, the Netherlands has made $310 million available to St. Martin's trust fund, for which we are very grateful. The execution or implementation of the projects have been challenging due to many inevitable factors. However, with the technical assistance of the World Bank team in collaboration with the Interim Recovery Committee, which consists of the group of professional civil servants in various ministries, with the available funds, 3 large projects are being implemented right now. They are the Emergency Recovery Project, which focuses on the repairs of shelters, homes, social housing, repairs of first responders such as the fire department, power plants, police station, and a number of public schools which are often used as shelters. The Emergency Income and Training Project, and the Hospital Resilience Project. As Prime Minister of St. Martin, I am tasked with the job of overseeing the rebuilding process through the execution of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. I have spent my first year in office working tirelessly to rebuild our island and to look for ways to better prepare the country for future storms and financial consequences that will then come. The harsh impact of our new norm, our new reality, has caused us to come to terms with the importance of being prepared. In doing so, I have strived to follow the examples of other disaster-prone countries in the Caribbean region and to implement existing best practices. One of the very important lessons learned was shared in the Building Resilience to Disaster, a Climate Change in the Caribbean Conference in Washington, D.C., by Christine Lagarde, Managing Director of the IMF. She said in her address, and I quote, "As we see it, building resilience to disasters and climate change rests on three complementary pillars. The first is securing structural protection through resilient infrastructure, adequate land use, zoning rules, and building codes, and early warning systems. The second is financial protection through insurance or risk-sharing mechanisms to reduce the cost of damage done by disasters when they occur. And the third, the final pillar, is emergency response by ensuring rapid access to financing and contingency plans to help with recovery after a disaster." I think I should repeat that, and I would look at Genevieve. Emergency response by ensuring rapid access to financing and contingency plans to help with recovery after a disaster. These many lessons have been translated into the programs such as the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which are executed via projects according to the World Bank standards and financed through the Trust Fund. The preparation, coordination, execution, and evaluation of the projects will be executed by the National Recovery Program Bureau, which was recently established. Regardless of the many obstacles we have faced during these difficult times, together as a nation, we are able to rise despite the odds simply because, as a nation, St. Martin never gave up. Where there is a will, there will always be a way to overcome all obstacles. Yet the state of being resilient does not begin nor end here. In addition to the courage and commitment of the people, despite our fears, preparation is and remains the key. The key to preparation for a disaster is preparation itself. To be prepared is to prepare. Preparation is not a one-man show. It requires strong partnerships and commitments, clear goals, and defined actions. Not only domestic actions, but most importantly, regional and international agreements are necessary to achieve sustainable development. Developing strategies on sustainable funding is also a major importance in this regard, a challenge which can be tackled by means of effective planning and introduction of innovative frameworks and regulations aimed at the reduction of bureaucratic processes. The enforcement of the law also remains an important element in the preparation phase. In particular, traffic laws assuring that ruined vehicles and debris are removed from the public roads in order to prevent such items from causing extensive damages to properties and persons during and after a catastrophe. Road blockages caused by large vehicles can hinder the evacuation or rescue services. Securing the physical protection and mental well-being of law enforcers, most importantly, police officers, coast guards, and also inspection officers in order to regulate the price of basic needs during and after a devastation. Controllers, policymakers tasked with the execution and enforcement of judicial matters, as well as the civil servants on and off duty as the forefronts of the country, especially when a state of emergency has been announced. The undertaking of the necessary steps in a timely manner in order to invoke change management, such as training and coaching of professionals and citizens by way of community drills and workshops, constitutes the effects of your ability to adequately prepare for the impossible. The aforementioned are all being addressed with the St. Martin Emergency Operations Center groups. Resilience can only exist if we do it together. Prepared countries build resilient regions. Almost 2 years later, despite our setbacks, threats, and challenges, I am proud to say that St. Martin has been able to introduce and implement structured programs and mechanisms using the National Recovery and Resilience Plan as guidelines. This has allowed our country to meet several of the objectives and align with the framework of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are being executed under the theme of Building Back a Better St. Martin. I would even dare to say building back a resilient St. Martin. Supporting the private sector and hotel chains in trainings for unemployed staffers during the hotel closure. Fostering public-private partnerships with learning institutions, developing an electrical, plumbing, and masonry program, resulting in approximately 90 qualified electricians, plumbers, and masons at various workshops and trainings on building and repairs with a regional training institute of Trinidad. Removing debris and sunken ships out of the lagoon and surrounding waters in accordance with the parameters and protection laws of the Nature Foundation. Ongoing discussions and development of a plan towards a strategy concerning sustainable energy consumption using sun panels or solar panels by the electrical power plant. We organized a recovery expo in collaboration with the business sector organization and private sector. Rebuilding the hospital in such a manner to sustain winds of 180 miles per hour in order to withstand a Category 5 hurricane plus. We developed a disaster management fund. We're busy placing all of our power lines on the ground. We organized an annual disaster management conference, and we're supporting young professionals in the implementation of the Green Box recycling program in schools and businesses. We have established the evacuation protocol between the fire department within the kingdom, and we became a member of the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility called CRIF, all things that are ongoing and have been implemented thus far. As it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals have helped coordinate, outline, and evaluate our achievements in terms of recovery. In order to initiate steps towards regional success with the Dutch OCTs, I am proud to announce that the Prime Minister of Aruba, the Honorable Evelyn Waver Cruz, and Prime Minister of Curaçao, the Honorable Eugene Rugenaert, and myself as Prime Minister of St. Martin, have committed to a much-needed high-level political forum for sustainable development by establishing the Covenant of Savanita, which was ratified in December of 2018 in Aruba. This agreement facilitates various economic, social, and environmental dimensions that our countries collectively face. As an extended partnership initiative, we have also signed an MOU on labor migration and the Dutch Caribbean region, within the Dutch Caribbean region. This project will be outlined during the symposium that will be taking place in May in 2019 in Curaçao, which will result in a policy proposal. Together with stakeholders from the countries involved, we aim to manage population growth and stimulate healthy flow of migration. As we say in Dutch, een goede start is het halve werk, meaning a good start is simply half the work, or half the battle. Having the privilege of being present in Aruba amongst my counterparts and partners in resilience, we seek to complete this vision by outlining this covenant into a smart and tangible plan of action. This level of support and commitment is essential for the growth and diversification of a resilient nation. I therefore urge all leaders, stakeholders, and partners to join us on the field on battling the odds on overcoming paralyzing threats by joining us in being prepared. St. Martin, passionately characterized by many, as I said, the friendly island, but now known as the resilient island, is available, willing, and able to extend our support where needed to each of our neighboring countries and future partners in resiliency. Together, we are stronger. United, we are a force. So we must speak with one voice. Let us work together by instituting benchmarks towards excellence, establishing best practices to achieve effective sustainable development goals, and embark on innovations that foster a more resilient future for our people and build an integrated and empowered region as a whole. As Prime Minister of St. Martin and your partner in this battlefield of resilience, I would like to close by encouraging everyone to believe in your ability to rise up against all odds by being prepared and working together. I wish everyone a happy day further, and I gracefully thank you for your attention. And I have it in Papiamento from my Honorable Prime Minister of Aruba. It says, Dignitarios y colega nang presente. Feliz dia y masha danki pa bu atención.
Thank you for so adequately summing up the St. Martin experience. And I'm sure we can all agree that we are really fortunate to have her here against all odds and considering what is happening on the ground in St. Martin. So let's give her a round of applause to thank her once again. So I know that you do have some questions. Just a few housekeeping rules with regard to the questions. Let us keep it as succinct as possible and limit the preambles for the break time conversations. So we would now entertain a few questions on the presentation, of course. And if we can have, and I already see one microphone, please state your name and the institution you're representing, and can we have a microphone? For the live feed, for the benefit of the viewing audience.
Madam Prime Minister, I want to thank you very much. This was an excellent relation of your information to us. And I wanted to ask you at what phase you believe that you are in at the moment. It seems like you're laying the groundwork and you're putting together the strategy, which is an awful lot. You did say preparation is everything, but could you give us just an inkling of where you believe you stand in the overall project?
Where does St. Martin stand in the overall project? I can break it down in several categories, but I would say that St. Martin is still in a crisis mode. I can tell you that we had many visitors that came to St. Martin, and sometimes they were even shocked that we even had a storm, considering the cleanup. But externally everything looks good, but internally is where a lot of work needs to get done. We're still waiting and planning because we're in a financial crisis right now, and we're still waiting on certain projects to be rolled out. It is a lengthy process, lengthier than we thought, but nevertheless we are still trying to still achieve the goals with using the resources that we do have. So we are still in the preliminary stages. I can't say that we have made a huge leapfrog approach. In some areas, yes, but not in all areas. We still have a lot of work to do. Yeah, you are.
Prime Minister, my name is Winston Dukaran from the University of the West Indies. Thank you very much for a very elaborate and comprehensive assessment of how you handled that situation. In it, you said that yourself, along with the Prime Minister of Aruba and the Prime Minister of the Curacao, have agreed to establish a high-level dialogue on sustainable development for the region to see what common grounds there are and common approaches that there can be in the wider issue of sustainable development. I'm just wondering if you could enlighten us a bit on the status of that initiative that the three Prime Ministers have taken and where it's likely to lead.
I will start with the last comment. I believe you stated, where is that likely to lead? It will lead to what we have established for so many years ago, a stronger bond with each other. We have different statuses at the moment, but the assistance amongst each other has never changed. I can clearly state that if we are in need, the first groups that are always there to help St. Martin is both Aruba and Curacao. So by establishing the Covenant of Savanita, we are going to analyze and look into the various areas where we are able to assist each other and be more effective, especially in one of the areas in disaster management. Right after the storm, I can tell you that our hospitals were damaged, and we had to do something with our kidney patients. The island that came full force and assisted St. Martin was the island of Aruba. I can clearly say that was really appreciated. My dad was one of those patients. So having such an agreement is more an opportunity for us to merge efforts, for an opportunity for us to see how we can use the resources, because each island have their own financial struggles. But if we can combine things together, if we can collaborate together, together we are a stronger force. And that I can stand here even before becoming Prime Minister. I know that despite, and I state this clearly, we have different statuses, but that status have never hindered us from cooperating with each other. Covenant or no covenant, we will continue to collaborate with each other. And that's the strong tie that we have with our sister islands.
Madam Prime Minister, thank you for that. And I appreciate the definition of resilience you gave during your talk. But when I've looked at the way that people have defined resilience, they sometimes do it in two different ways. One definition of resilience is to go back to the state that you had before, right? Because you're recreating the state that existed before the crisis occurred or the change occurred. The other way that resilience is defined is, how do you create a state that reflects some of the things that have happened? So it may not necessarily be the same state you're in prior to the crisis. And if I give you an example, let's look at a utility grid that has been hit. There's often a lot of pressure to reproduce the same utility grid that you had before, or a country had before. So that's a resilience to come back to that steady state. But that may not necessarily make you any better prepared for the next crisis that hits. So in a case like that, a recovery might envision a utility grid that is different and accommodates perhaps the next extreme event. Do you want to perhaps comment on the two different definitions of resilience and how that might be implemented in St. Martin?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that question, Mr. Randall. Indeed, you are quite correct. When we talk about resilience, you can look at it as the way we are bouncing back. And do we want to bounce back the way we were before? No, we don't. Because this is one of the reasons why $25 million was invested into our not airport, but the hospital, to make it more windproof, 180 miles plus. The hospital was, I believe, for category 4, or even maybe category 3, 4. It was built for category 4, just to be on the safe side. But now, with this new plan, it's for it to be category 5 and more, because no one ever thought that we would have a category 5 plus storm. Now, again, that is being resilient, looking at it, building back better and stronger than we were before. When we're talking about shelters, building back shelters, we looked at, we can't go back to the ways that where we used to only use schools as a place of shelter for our people. When school starts back, it becomes a challenge for persons who don't have a home to leave the schools, and then for children to see that it just wasn't feasible. So one of the things that we did is we have to find standalone shelters, multifunctional shelters, where, because the land is scarce as well. So when you're planning and when you're building back, you cannot plan and build back to what was. You must think futuristic. You must think of, have plans that are in place to be able to think about the unthinkable. So you have to plan in advance. So you're definitely correct when you're talking about when you're going to build back resilient. Resiliency incorporates building for the future and not building for the now or building to what was.
Good morning. My name is Beatriz Jenny Figueroa. I'm coming from Puerto Rico, and I am deeply grateful for you being here, for your existence in the world, and for all you've told us today. I was fighting back tears because I feel, frankly, a lot of envy. In Puerto Rico, probably it was more of a disaster, the management of the disaster, both from the local and the federal U.S. government, and I imagine I don't have to say a lot about that. But my question is concerning one of the things that happened in Puerto Rico that wasn't discussed enough, in my opinion, was the rise in gender violence after the storm, and the fact that the little shelters we have are for themselves. They don't have funding anyway, so they're anyway always struggling. But after the storm, they were closed. So basically, we had a deep gender crisis, what to do with women who were being abused in all kinds of ways. So I don't want to talk a lot, but I just wanted to ask whether in these plans, these resilient plans, what is the gender consciousness of them, or what are the programs that perhaps you're thinking about or implementing in San Martin, so I can take back some ideas. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you for that question. We didn't experience that in St. Martin. At least that's not the information that I received. It's quite unfortunate that that happened in Puerto Rico. What I can say is that just like when we are planning to build back our prisons, even our shelters, you have to think for the future, to include the gender part, to make sure that women are protected. So I don't have those plans with me, but definitely you can stay in contact with me, and I will make sure that that information comes to you if there's anything specific, as I believe that we all can learn from each other and the best practices that we practice on each island, so that we can improve on what we have. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Iwan Sobarab Misser, and I'm a retired international finance specialist. I've spent 3 decades working at the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the Latin American Development Bank. I'm very curious to know about the procedures that were agreed between the Dutch government, St. Martin, and the World Bank. Because obviously, you're dealing with an emergency situation, and I know from having been there many, many times, that the ex-ante evaluation criteria of the World Bank can be pretty rough. So what kind of emergency procedures were agreed, if any? And could you embellish a bit on what your government is doing to sort of ease up the situation and get things done?
A loaded question. I can state that the processes of the World Bank are the processes of the World Bank. In all honesty, would St. Martin like to see things move faster? Indeed. I would be honestly a hypocrite to say that things are going as fast as I would like it to go, or as fast as the people expect it. Each hurricane season is June 1st, is the beginning of a new hurricane season. And you just pray to God that nothing happens during that period. If I had the ability to accelerate the process, believe me, we would be much further than where we're at right now. But it's very cumbersome, and I must state that, you deal with the cards that you have been given, especially in light, as I stated, that we are in a financial crisis. So if you do know some philanthropist that is willing to give St. Martin some money, I will take this opportunity to solicit this way, so we can get some things done without the procedures and processes. Yeah. And I know you fully understand. I remember sitting in that same IMF meeting, and the president, the prime minister of St. Lucia, I think it's recorded so I can quote him. He didn't speak of a particular agency, but he did speak of international agency, that sometimes when you think you're going to get these monies, it's just, when are you going to get the monies? It's the when. And I listened to him, and it was almost like I was speaking. So if I can put it so kindly. But indeed, like I stated, we're in a very difficult position right now. And because we have financial constraints, one of the main sources that we are dependent on are these funds from the Netherlands. And remember, it's a different situation. It's not World Bank monies. We didn't go to the World Bank and ask for funding. The monies were given from the Netherlands, given to the World Bank to manage. So the World Bank is the in-between entity that is disbursing the monies to St. Martin in various tranches. This is the first time St. Martin has worked with the World Bank. It's a learning process, especially in the beginning on the procedures, the procurements, et cetera, so that took some time. For some projects, we are seeing the fruits of a lot of the labor that has been put in. We have some repairs. Our police station is being repaired right now because they had some damages. We had an excellent program that was run where we allowed about 90 individuals to be able to open their own businesses, so the electricians, et cetera, making them more sustainable. We've seen the projects of the St. Martin Medical Center up and running. We've also had programs where we had trainings for a lot of those persons in the hospitality sector where they were on the verge of losing their jobs, and instead of losing their jobs, we retrain them and then ensure that they they're better equipped for when the hotels do open back up, and then they received a stipend as well. We've also given stipends to persons who are helping with the debris management. So there's some progress going on, and it just takes some time. And I'm hoping to push some more buttons. If you have all the contacts, you can do that as well. But indeed, we're working with the cards that we have been dealt with. It's not easy, but nevertheless, we're still grateful because it's better than nothing.
I'm Jamie Leclay. I actually work at the World Bank. I'm not here in the capacity of the World Bank. I'm here as a family, as a friend. I'm from Aruba, so also to St. Martin. Last year, I also took part in the Back Better Week. I actually hosted Next Gen session. I have a much lighter question. I want to know what you're really doing for the society, for the community, and for the next gen of St. Martin, and how you're rebuilding in a more resilient way, and how their future will be envisioned in you as the Prime Minister. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So basically, what are we doing for our youth at this current moment? I can tell you that after a storm, you have to compartmentalize everything. The first being getting our hospitals, our emergency projects back up and running, ensuring that our schools are rebuilt, ensuring that the children get the necessary tools needed, because some of our schools, we have one school that is totally gone. And what does that do to the other schools? Because other kids are being placed there, overcrowding in schools. So we have to address those fundamental part. I can tell you that I'm the Prime Minister for the recovery process. Whoever's going to take over after me will have to start working and laying the groundwork for other things. And I'll just be frank about that. Not saying that we're not thinking about the development of our youth. We are thinking about the development of our youth, but in order to move this to a second stage, we must complete the recovery process first and improving on what we have. Because I can easily state that let's come up with a new program to bring back our students from the Netherlands or wherever they're at, from Aruba, wherever they're at, to St. Martin. But what am I bringing them back to if I don't have a place to put them? The teachers, if I don't have a school to allow them to be able to teach, if our hospital is not built back the way it should be built back, you know, that we're lacking certain things in our infrastructure. So I prefer to build on that first and then focus on the other areas. Not saying that the other areas are not a priority, they are. But I really think that the reason, and I'm going to be clear, I did not get voted in. There's a difference. I got appointed for this period, and this period is the recovery process. So that is what I am really, truly focusing on, to ensure that our people benefit from every penny given by the organization, that, not given, but that is being disbursed from the organization that you work for. So that is my goal. And then, yes, do I want our, and when we look at our youths, if we have positions that need to be filled, I want our people, our students, wherever they're at, our youth, to take up those positions. And if they can't take up those positions, then I would like for a counterpart process to start where you have experts like yourself You train my students, you train my youth, and then, well, you're Arubian, so you don't count, and then you leave. If you get what I'm saying, you train and then you leave, don't stay. Give the opportunity to our youth first so that they can learn, so that they can take over. Because we have a lot of weaknesses. One of them is procurement processes. And I would like to see some of our students come back and master that. Because if we master that, then we don't need a lot of consultants. Then we can do those things on our own. I would like to see a lot of our youth get trained also in how to apply for grant funding from various institutions. Those are one of our weaknesses. That is one of our weaknesses. And while we are not planning, as you were asking me, what is going to be done right now, I'm focusing on recovery, but part of recovery is ensuring that we don't have that gap anymore, because we have a huge gap when it comes to competency and placing the right people in the positions to take over when the consultancy phases, the consultants are gone. I hope I answered your question to the
Madam Prime Minister, what do you think the role of CARICOM is, or what has the role of CARICOM been in the past, and what, in your view, is the role of the Caribbean community moving forward in terms of building back and building resilience?
I missed the first part of the question, but I can tell you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so what has the role of CARICOM been in the past so far since the impact of the hurricane? And then what do you see is the role of the Caribbean community moving forward in building back and building resilience?
Well, I'm a strong proponent for Caribbean regionalism. Yeah, that's this Prime Minister. In the past, as I stated before, St. Martin, every CARICOM country is represented in St. Martin. We are a melting pot of the Caribbean. And I believe that you asked the role of CARICOM in the past. There wasn't much of a role of CARICOM in the past. But we are on a path right now to have a membership, associate membership in CARICOM. I believe, it's my strong belief, that I can identify with things that are happening in St. Croix, things that are happening in Antigua, things that are happening in St. Kitts, than I can with things that are happening in the Netherlands or in Latin America. I'm just being truthful. Can the Caribbean countries help us? Yes, they can definitely help us. Can we help them? Yes, we can definitely do that. I sat in meetings when we're looking for cooperation with the Dutch Marines. The other countries, the other CARICOM countries are looking for assistance in that. We're looking at cooperation with SEDEMA. And we can benefit from each other's efforts. It's the same relationship that we have with Aruba and Curacao, we're extending to other countries as well. Again, it's because we see and feel each other's pain. You're only 2 hours away from me, Trinidad. And one of the dilemmas that we have in St. Martin, especially in St. Martin, yes, we are an island or a country within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but English is our language spoken. English is the language of comprehension. It's a big problem. So when we decided, I talked about the 90 persons that are being educated right now for the training. You know where we got that from? Trinidad. We could not have gone to the Netherlands and asked for the same training. Why? Because who we're catering to is Caribbean English-speaking people, residents of St. Martin. And so it's, what can CARICOM mean for us? It can mean a lot to us, especially when it comes to safety and security. We have people traveling in and out. And Caribbean people, we are migrating people. And it won't stop. I am a product of that migration. So I stand here and a strong believer in the fact that we have to pull our resources together because we can't compete with the outside world. We can be each other's first contact. When we're looking at places, for example, in a disaster, if we have to evacuate persons, let's say Aruba can't. Maybe Trinidad can. Maybe Antigua can. But if we have some kind of dialogue, some kind of understanding where we cannot live the way we used to live anymore. That is one thing this disaster has taught me, is that no man is an island, and we need each other. I'll give you a quick response. Geneve, just give me a quick response. A former politician told me once, a couple of years ago, they had a disaster. Anguilla was hit bad, and they received a pump from the Netherlands, from St. Martin. And you know, Anguilla is just a boat ride away, and they were flooded over there. Without permission, he took the pump and sent it over on the boat to assist Anguilla. And that helped them. That's the kind of cooperation, unspoken cooperation, that happens amongst the islands, because we need each other. The point is that we need each other, and when it comes to natural disasters, we can't turn a blind eye. We can't continue in direction. We need to speak with one voice. The Caribbean countries are least in gas emission, but we get affected by it the most, and the other islands as well. But if we don't stand up with one voice against the bigger powers, we're going to continuously have problems. So as you can see, I'm very much for that tighter bond.
My name is Stan Brunn. Thank you for your very insightful comments. I recommend this be translated into other languages and shown to affiliate groups, universities, United Nations, World Bank. You have to have to lock them into a room for an hour to listen to what you've shared and what the questions have been. This is outstanding. Thank you. I have a couple questions. Could you share with us the importance, the role of faith communities, religious communities in disaster relief, disaster cleanup, and also maybe voluntary organizations and maybe the World Bank, not only what they've done, but also your assessment of it. That would help us. Thank you.
Yes. Indeed, thank you for that question, and thank you for your generous comment as well. The religious community, Samaritan Purse, I've never heard of them before, but they were life changers for a lot of the churches on St. Martin, and were able to help with the distribution. Other organizations came in. But one of the things that I can say is, again, we had our challenges, and one of the things that was not properly organized, we had an influx of international organizations coming into St. Martin. Some of them, we didn't know who was doing what. It was very disorganized at times. And you didn't have a good grasp on what they were doing. Monies were given to some organizations privately from groups. What did they do with the monies? We have no clue. So what we've learned from our mistakes, and again, is being more resilient and building back better, is we have looked at our failures or the things that we have to improve on and said, hey, that was a huge problem during Hurricane Irma or after Hurricane Irma. We need to structure it more effectively. So that is something that our Foreign Affairs Department has done. Has the religious community been helpful for us? I can tell you, yes. One particular group, the Samaritan Purse, came in. We've never heard of, at least I have never heard of them before, and they were very instrumental in helping building back the churches as well. The churches on St. Martin, some of them serve as key entities in the community to assist in distribution of food. And in our new plans, we are using the community councils and churches more, because they are the ones that are supposed to know the people within the community, so that they can say, oh, okay, there's an elderly lady on this and this street that didn't get help. Or because the Red Cross came out, they were giving stuff out. Do I think they have reached everyone? They reached everyone? No, they didn't. Because if you don't know the people in your community, then you have a problem. You know, and that goes over for everything. And so the churches and the community councils play a key role, and will continue now to play a more stronger role when it comes to the distribution of goods and making sure that you get in contact with those who need it. Then you asked about the the volunteer community. We have the K1 Britannica group on St. Martin. Okay, you have the Red Cross, those who are to volunteer for the Red Cross. I can't really speak on the Red Cross because I can't recall seeing a lot of persons, local persons, in the Red Cross after Irma. I was a regular citizen, civil servant. I can't recall that, but definitely K1 Britannia. They were very instrumental, a local group of volunteers. They were superb in assisting the department in distributing of goods. So do we need more volunteer workers? Do we need more? Yes, and this is why I believe the community councils should play a stronger role. It needs to be structured. And again, we did a man-in-the-mirror approach in addressing the areas where we failed or we didn't, that need developing. And the community councils is one of them. We have to structure that better because, again, they can be very instrumental during a crisis. And we use them in an ad hoc fashion in the last storm, but we can use them more effectively once structured. And we have the Ministry of Health and Labor is busy with that.
And our final question.
Thank you. Carlos Amaral, University of the Azores in Portugal. Thank you very much for a most interesting keynote address. I'm very pleased. It was a pleasure to be here and to listen to you. One comment and one question. First, the comment. Upon hearing you, it came to mind that once you start scratching the surface, it appears that our realities are not so different. Irma, Maria, your destruction, in the late 1980s, an earthquake destroyed our islands, razed entire cities, entire villages, and it was necessary to start from scratch,
Yes.
to rebuild, because that's who we are, and that's what we must do. It's not more than a question of resilience, it's an ontological question, and it seems that it is of the very essence of islands and of islanders and of being an islander, to be exposed to be fragile, to be exposed to a series of natural threats, disasters, the lack of natural resources, the fragility. That's who we are. And again, cooperation, of course, because being together and sharing similar stories, because sharing a similar identities and similar natures, we will be far better able to go forward, whether in the Caribbean, in the South Pacific, or in the North Atlantic, because this is what insularity, this is what being an island is all about. The question, very simple, perhaps stupid question, why involve the World Bank? We were able to reconstruct our islands ourselves,
Okay.
with assistance from the outside, of course, with assistance from the country, of course, from the EU, of course, but we were able to rebuild it ourselves. Why involve the World Bank? Thank you.
That is a great question. But may I ask you, what was your financial status at the time of the disaster that you all have? Were you financially stable? You weren't? Okay. Why involve the World Bank? St. Martin didn't involve the World Bank. The World Bank was chosen by the Netherlands as the entity to distribute the monies. Why not other entities? That is a question I believe that the Netherlands have to answer. But I believe that they felt that the World Bank is a trusted entity to be able to disperse the monies, that amount of money, to the island of St. Martin, and that was an agreement made between the Netherlands and the World Bank. Now, during a disaster, I believe that the Netherlands have a responsibility, because we're within the kingdom, to grant assistance to the islands. And with that responsibility, they chose the manner in which how they wanted it to be given. So in a nutshell, why choose the World Bank? My answer, St. Martin did not choose the World Bank. The World Bank was chosen for St. Martin. So we're working with them.
Thank you all for your questions. And on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to present a token of appreciation to Mrs. Leona Romeo Marlin. And we really, really do. I want to emphasize how much we appreciate your presence here, and especially being able to respond to these questions about the current and the future status of St. Martin. So thank you once again.
Thank you. My thanks as well. And just a couple of housekeeping notes. A reminder that this session is being live streamed. So for those who are online watching this, we're taking a break right now, and there will be another session starting here at 10 o'clock. We will be setting up some tables in the front. But don't worry, it'll start again. But remember that there are 3 concurrent sessions going after. There's the one here, but there are other sessions in room B and room C to attend as well. This may be the last opportunity before the field trip as well for me to speak to all of you as a group. So a reminder that at 12:30, no later than 12:30, if you are going on the field trip, you need to meet in front of the church, and that's just to the left of the University of Aruba. So you'll go out and to the left, and that's where the bus will be waiting for you to go on the field trip, no later than 12:30. And finally, the public forum tonight. You know that that is a free public forum. We've had a very strong response from the public community to come to that. We've had, I believe, at least 50 people that have signed up for that. And so if you wish to come in and get a seat here, make sure that you come early. It's going to be first come, first seated. It will be live streamed on one of the other rooms if there's overflow here. But if you want a seat in here, you better come early. Okay, and I'm saying that to the live stream as well, so they have the opportunity to come early too. Okay, so with that, I want to once again thank you to the Prime Minister, and we'll reconvene at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Mr. Sitsakit. Test. Apakah bateria kita? Kau kita zona mes? Test. Alway. One, two, un, dos.
1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Está feedback. 1, 2. 1, 2. One, two, 1, 2. Quem depois andou para o rato, yana auto com gasolina. Qual? É 3903. A minha dia na buscar ele e carruagem me disse que para buscar para lá. Segundo, claro, claro. Acaba que já vi. E carro de gasolina, bota buscar esse que já na Ferrari. A disse que ele é full tank ele. All right, thank you. And the sali. One, two, 1, 2. I'm plugging in the window of this, not. One, two, mic test, 1, 2. Vai testa para bola. Vai de lá no vai a bana me tá caminho. Mic test, 1, 2, 1, 2. One, two, 1, 2. Sound check, 1, 2.
Testing.
1, 2, 1, 2. Tá bom, tá?
Testing 1, 2.
1, 2.
We can go any further because it will announce the live feed. Yeah, the live feed. Can I bom?
the receiver, so you can walk around. That's how they map out the that.
Takes the vector to innovate in reality.
Yeah,
They were just testing me with that.
yeah, maybe that's it. But that's the role I have to play. My wife always tells me, well, sometimes you're involved in all of these things. Yeah, that's true. That's, yeah, it's here. And then as it gets done, that's
Okay. Hi, nice to meet you.
Good morning, everyone. thank you so much for coming. And having heard the Prime Minister, that was a very neat segue into the session we have for the next hour and a half, which is providing a truly sort of pan-Caribbean perspective on the impacts and recovery and reconstruction as a consequence of both Hurricanes Irma and Maria from September 2017. Before we go into providing a brief overview of some of the particular islands that were affected 18 months or so ago, just to set the scene slightly and how this next hour and a half will run as well. So both Hurricane Irma and Maria, as I said, hit the Caribbean across September. Irma was the strongest storm on record to exist in the open Atlantic. It was the first Category 5 hurricane to strike the Leeward Islands on record. Irma and Maria were the costliest Caribbean hurricanes, again on record. Irma, 52 direct fatalities affecting Barbuda, St. Bart's, Anguilla, St. Martin, the Virgin Islands, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Turks and Caicos Islands, the Bahamas, and the eastern United States. Maria, 65 deaths on Dominica, impacted on the US Virgin Islands, and perhaps most significantly Puerto Rico as well, with over 3,000 fatalities. So today is trying to provide that broader context to understand the particular circumstances within individual islands and compare and contrast what has happened since then. We'll be talking very briefly, hopefully then we'll allow most of the time for a sort of a dynamic discussion to bring in your experiences and expertise, and hopefully by the end of the session we'll have a truly sort of pan-Caribbean view on how things are going in relation to the recovery. So perhaps without further ado, I can invite Arno to provide his perspective.
Good morning, bon dia. Yes, it's my pleasure to present a story, an island story. My name is Arno Boersma, and until very recently I was working for the UNDP Center of Excellence here on Aruba, Center of Excellence for Small Island Developing States. And I think my little story fits very well with the very eloquent keynote we heard this morning from the Prime Minister of St. Martin. Because one of the projects we did in over the last 3 years is a project trying to help St. Martin recover from the hurricane, and it was a very little piece of the larger puzzle that we heard from this morning, but I think a very interesting one, and one that I certainly want to share. Next slide, please, or do I have a clicker? I'm in control. Thank you. So people who probably lived through the hurricane, which we on Aruba did not, are probably fed up with pictures about what it looked like, and they would prefer to see pictures of, indeed, St. Martin open for business, tourists, etc. Like the Prime Minister said this morning, sometimes people visit the island, they never knew there was a hurricane. The only reason I'm showing you this for those people who did not see the hurricane is, for example, look at that container in the picture above, just to show you the sheer force of the hurricane that passed the island. I mean, it was extremely powerful. And our organization, which was set up 3 years ago here on Aruba, is meant to help islands around the world. We're based on Aruba, but our focus is sharing best practices around the world, from Fiji to Samoa to the Seychelles, and also between Aruba and St. Martin. So when the hurricane hit, and especially since we're based within the kingdom, we said, what can we do as a small center from Aruba to help St. Martin recover, even though we're very, very small? So we asked a question, and I visited St. Martin a few months after, and we said, so how do you tap into the entrepreneurial spirit of a nation to recover from a hurricane? How do you connect talented professionals with ideas to build back better? And how do you use the collective expertise to come up with solutions for a resilient future? of course, we saw, and many saw, that there were many things happening, and there were a lot of initiatives for immediate response. But what I also noticed is talking to a lot of the people on St. Martin, is that they were very eager to do something. Entrepreneurs, academics, civil servants, there was an incredible energy to do something. So with our limited budget, we said, you know what, we're going to bring them together, and we're just going to have them, anyone with a good idea, we're going to try and put them in one room and facilitate the discussion and help them come up with great ideas for a more resilient future of St. Martin. And the great thing is everyone was very quickly on board. We also partnered with Ernst & Young in Caribbean, who paid half of the budget, and some other organizations like Present Your Startup, because we really wanted to tap into all the ideas that were coming up. So to answer that question, we said, okay, let's create an event, totally open, at no cost to St. Martin, where everyone can come together and basically brainstorm from all the different parts of society. A very practical way to do this. It had several elements. It had a do tank, where we said, okay, it's almost like, for those people who know what a hackathon is, it's like a hackathon where you just sit in groups and you brainstorm very specific challenges and come up with ideas. We had a do trade. There were companies coming into St. Martin also to see how they could help St. Martin with the recovery in various industries like energy, tourism. There was a question from Jamie this morning, which was about the next gen. So there was a session about what can we do, or how can the next generation of St. Martin help. And there were also, since there were so many experts who, good to mention, all flew in at their own cost. No one was paid for this. They all flew in. We said, okay, well, if they're in town, if they're on the island, let's hear from them. So experts on tourism, energy, etc. So it was about 3.5 days, full of a lot of excitement and knowledge. And it was actually very interesting that, because I'm sure the Prime Minister had a lot going on, but we had been preparing this for quite a while, and I actually sat behind her on the plane on the way. I think I went there a week early, and I was telling your colleague who was sitting next to me on the plane what we were doing, and then at a certain moment she looked back and said, tell me a little bit more about that. And I still think it's the master of ceremony, John Sandiford, who convinced you to actually attend and be part of this. But as you will see, the Prime Minister was also a very avid supporter and participant in this event. I'd like to show you a short video, which is always the best way to show what we did, just so you can get an impression of the Build Back Better week on St. Martin. The first prize, the award of the Do Tank, is a few things. It is $2,500 to get started with implementing your idea from the Buddy Entrepreneurship Program at St. Martin. It is also included is mentorship, and what we found out this week, also 1 year of free advertising on Island 92 radio.
We all are a part of this future. So we will turn the quote-unquote dump into a vision that says a flamboyant park. So a solar flamboyant park that was an iconic hell has turned into an iconic hope.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, as the Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, we should ensure, especially in the recovery months after Irma, that we give the youth a voice and that we indeed don't forget their involvement in our recovery and reconstruction process.
For example, in Denisio's case, he had a agricultural festival where the gardeners were able to sell the actual produce and make back some money. So in that way, we were able to reduce poverty.
This proposal brings together the St. Martin Council on the Arts, Arts Save Lives, and the National Institute of Arts, who have a 55 years combined experience and are the undisputed authority on culture and arts in sweet St. Martin land.
the people of St. Martin, I would like to express sincere gratitude to the UNDP and the Center of Excellence for the sustainable development of small islands development states for taking this vital and important initiative to bring together the great minds we have in this room. And the winner is Greenwood! I'm really, I'm so proud because you have a balance of millennials, Y generation, X generation, baby boomers, everyone coming together and bringing great ideas to the forefront, and that shows proper balance that we all need, generation, whichever generation, we need each other.
So as you could see, and I'm very aware this was a drop in the bucket of all the things that were happening to recover, to help St. Martin recover. But I think what you probably saw is the resilience that the Prime Minister talked about this morning, the resilience in the people. I think that was one thing that became very apparent. There were incredible ideas. And we actually put people in groups, and I should say one of the co-organizers, also Bianca, is also sitting here, so if you have questions later, she's also here in the room, one of the key organizers of this. But just bringing people with the same mindset in one room from all different walks of life, different organizations, it created a lot of energy. So in short, as you see, it was 3 days, 166 participants. There were 21 teams working on ideas. 45 international companies actually joined these few days. And like I said, very different because everyone had to pay. So the ones that showed up actually had a very intrinsic interest to help. Expert sessions, next generation activities. There were cleanups and also ideas for moving on. And just to get a sense of what basically came up out of all these discussions is 21 great ideas that were across various very important topics for the recovery. What's interesting is these pitches. So we asked these groups to actually present their ideas in 3 minutes. You may have seen the timer in the video. They're all available. So if you go to Facebook, you can actually see them and see what they came up with, because some of them may not have been implemented, but could be very interested for some of the islands that you're working with. What's especially interesting is that there was follow-up to the event. So not only did people win prizes and have money to actually move on, but I think the Prime Minister mentioned Greenbox, which was the winner at this event, actually went on to start the company, is now one of the preeminent voices for recycling on the island. And they're moving into more innovative spaces by creating an app for recycling, which I think would be very interesting for them to then become an example for the Caribbean to actually adopt that idea. But more than just some of the ideas that are now actually being rolled out is that a lot of the connections were made between people that both lived on St. Martin but may have not ever met each other, or there would be some person who had a piece of land and someone else who's trying to grow local produce. And they actually sat at the same table. So I think that was probably one of the biggest benefits of the event, is that a lot of people met people that they would otherwise not have met. And I can say for myself, going to, having worked for the UN, going to a lot of conferences, the people working for islands don't necessarily meet. This is a more academic conference. A week and a half ago, I was in Curacao, and it was an entrepreneurship conference, also for islands. But only a few people, bridge that divide. Then if I go to UN conference, again, I don't see very often don't see the private sector, don't see the academia. And I think this is one of the things we should do a lot more, is actually bridge these islands of knowledge between academia, private sector, public sector, and also see how a lot of the research you're doing and publications that come out, how can we actually make sure they result in impact for the resilience of islands. So last slide, there's also been some press and some articles written about the event and some follow-up, but I think My main takeaways is that the sense of urgency actually is also an opportunity, because you'll notice that everyone is on the same page to rebuild the island and to make it more resilient. But the trick is get them in one room, get them to work on a common goal, and then the magic happens. Sounds simple, but somehow it doesn't always happen that way. Serious topics can be addressed in appealing, even fun ways. Yes, this was all about how to recover from a disaster, but as you saw, the energy, the positivity, the laughter, there was dancing, there was music. So I mean, you can do both. You can work on very serious topics, but in ways that are very appealing and fun. External parties can play a neutral convening role. Sometimes there are sensitivities on islands between parties, between companies, and one of the things that we noticed, we're based on Aruba, wanted to help St. Martin. We came to St. Martin with one sole purpose, and that was to help through this event and hopefully the things that rolled out of this event. There were no other interests, and sometimes on islands, certain institutions or people, they have legacies or they have histories, and it's more difficult to get the collaboration going. So at the same time, as we heard this morning, we went in, we did what we could, we embedded it, and then we went back out, because these types of initiatives should be owned by the local players and stakeholders. And lastly, I think good to mention is that to give everyone a platform. We noticed in just talking to people that they didn't know where to go, and obviously government was extremely busy with immediate response, but there were people who had great ideas, but they just did not have the avenues, or young people that didn't have the connections. And so take into account that part of a resilient recovery is also to try and be very inclusive, try and involve all the stakeholders across society, and the next generation who may be connected over social media but may not have a place to actually go. And then ensure follow-up is prepared. This is not about a one-off event. This is about what's actually going to happen afterwards. So I think, like I said, this was a little piece of the puzzle, which was I think very successful, especially because we're still hearing in the news about things that are coming out of this event. Marcia, dankie. Questions? I think, Mr. Moderator, I'll take questions now. I think so. Okay, because not to be impolite, but I also have to present in another room in 10 minutes. So, are there any questions for me at this point? Yes. Give a mic.
Hello. I'd like to thank you on behalf of St. Martin for that initiative. My friends were the ones that won the Green Box Challenge, and as you know, it is continuing to grow. So that was an extremely great initiative. Was that the first time you guys initiated such a project on another island, or are there other experiences that you might have elsewhere?
It was the first time we did it in this context. But the organizers, so I worked for the World Bank for 10 years before I moved to Aruba for the UN, and hackathons and these types of formats were quite common. Bianca had done also a lot of these type of projects. As I said, Ernst & Young, innovation, the people who work with Axel de Vries, one of the leaders there, had also done some of these projects. So what we did, we took all our experiences and put it kind of in the context of, okay, how can you bring these people together with this purpose, with the purpose of building a resilient future for the island. And so it was more of a combination of things we had done, but never in this context. And so it was partly an experiment, I should say, also because you don't generally do these things with people who are also emotionally quite struck right? I mean, this is not a light topic to be, because I mean, literally people would be in the session who didn't sleep or still didn't have a roof over their head, and you know, so it's in that sense, in this context, it's very different than a hackathon at the World Bank, where you know people show up, and of course we're going to be more innovative. But this was very much more about real life and real life challenges. Yes. Yes.
Yes. In addition to networking that you have promoted as a center of excellence, usually centers of excellence promote best practices. Could you give us an example of 3 best practices that you have generated and discussed and promoted?
Sure. And I usually say we are a center in search of excellence, which is a little bit different than a center of excellence. I mean, I don't pretend we have all the excellence within our center, but what we indeed do as our mandate is look around the world and see where are islands doing great things in sustainable development. Could be sustainable tourism or renewable energy or waste management. Capture that and then distribute it. I'll give you one example, very simple, from Aruba, which is the Bakuti and Tara resort, a few miles from here, which is consistently awarded the most sustainable resort, or one of the top 3 most sustainable resorts in the world. So if any of you has any time left on your visit to Aruba, go check it out. We wrote a case study on how they did that. And especially in a very practical sense, how did they, years ago, they started thinking about how do we get rid of straws? What do we do with food waste? Why can't we get more energy from solar power? So that's one example, very close here to you all here. We've done case studies on renewable energy from a very different perspective on Jeju Island in Korea. How they changed their island and how they kind of evolved into a very leading renewable energy island. And that they're obviously not the SIDs, but if it's an island and there's lessons to be learned. We've done case studies on Grenada, also a very interesting agritourism project there, Belmont Estate, where they went from a very traditional farm, and the granddaughter of the owner at the time totally transformed it into a sustainable tourism destination that also produces a lot of agricultural products, and they've really, it's an employment benefit. It has benefits across the board. Yeah, those are a few. I would suggest if you go to sustainablesids.org, which is the website of the organization, you will see all these case studies which we have done. And to be frank, I'm always a bit hesitant to call them best practices, because who's telling, who's saying it's the best? I mean, at least it's a good practice, right? And but go to the website and you'll see a lot of these examples, because that's basically what the center does. Look around the world. If anyone does something well, we'd like to capture it, share it with the other islands. And it's a pity, because my talk in the other room in 10 minutes is exactly about this. It's about how do you bridge all islands of knowledge? Why does it often not happen? But why is it so important, especially for islands with limited resources, with much higher impact of, if a big investment goes wrong on an island, it's relatively a bigger hit than in a larger mainland country. So there's a lot of those variables, which is why one of the huge opportunities for islands is just to connect a lot more between the triple helix of academics, private sector, public sector, but also between each other. Of course, there's competition, but let's find your niche and be complementary, so that together, you'll be stronger, and there's some merit in the wisdom of crowds. So, sorry, there was another question here? Oh, sorry. We need maybe one question, and then may I just? Yes, sorry.
Okay. Does your initiative has any meaning in the go-between with the World Bank? So, because you have this local initiative, did it have any meaning? Is it a follow-up towards the World Bank?
This was when we did it. It was before the World Bank, or they were in discussions with the World Bank. not that I know of, let me put it this way. So, because this was a very much a bottom-up, society-driven, very little bureaucracy, not a lot of procurement, etc. So it was very much a society-driven, community-driven initiative. The reason I'm a bit hesitant to say, because I'm thinking out loud, is because it could very well be that some of these ideas could be funded from World Bank funds, if they fit all of the rules that have been set. So what I will stop here. What I would suggest, if there's any other questions about this, Bianca's in the room and she knows just as much about it as I do, and then she could probably answer any of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Arno. Thank you very much. Next on to Alison with a US Virgin Islands perspective.
Which do I press? You're not sure. Which do I press? Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your attendance here. So we wanted to, I guess, get different perspectives on what we went through with the hurricanes and where we are today. So I wanted to tailor my quick presentation around now what? The storm has passed. But I'm going to speak from a political side. I'm a senator. So we had our role to play in the resiliency, the bounce back of the islands. So my presentation is basically just going to quickly take you through some of what we went through. But as far as a senator and my powers, how did we contribute to bouncing back? So we had severe damage, as we know. I'm going to flip through these screens just so you can see some of the pictures. So all the pictures that I have are going to be of the Virgin Islands. So these are, whenever I look at it, I still get goosebumps because it's so real. That's our legislature building at the bottom, completely demolished. These were signs of what happened with our electricity. We had no electricity across the entire territory for about 3 months. These are homes. These are buildings and schools. This is one of our libraries. And we had people trapped for what could have been up to a week, week and a half. And we can show where we started fixing our roofs back and where we brought people in to start making sense of it all. So now the hurricane has passed. I'm a senator. Now what? So I want to talk a little bit about preparedness first. What we have to do as legislative people is have people understand how important preparing is. Preparedness became just as a tagline. Oh, we're preparing. We have a plan, a written plan. But what we found was we had to test the plan because there was actually gaps in coordination that we didn't realize existed. So whereas we would have 1 or 2 agencies who are diligent in working their plans or testing their plans, now we have mandated that each agency test their plan in coordination with other agencies and with mainland and our sister islands. When we got money from FEMA, one of the first things we realized were that we had to have matches. They weren't just going to give us $1 million and say, okay, rebuild back. We sometimes had to put up 10%, 20% of that money. In an already cash restricted environment, we have to become more diligent and plan on how we're going to have money in the event of a disaster. So we're pushing legislation where we set aside monies for capital projects. Every time we get grants, every time we get funding, we set aside something so that in the event of a hurricane or storm or tsunami, it's not if but when we can be able to meet our obligations. Unemployment benefits. A lot of people were without work. How are we going to keep these people financially above board to be able to still make their mortgages and be able to take care of their homes? We ensured that now that we have what's called a disaster unemployment insurance benefit, where once we are under a declared emergency, we can be able to give benefits to our residents who apply and meet the criteria. So if your hotel that you work to was demolished and we know that there's nowhere you can work, you can apply for benefits, and that way we can keep some sustainability in the home. FEMA, when it comes to money. What we realize is that when you get money, it's not just free money and they turn their backs. You have to understand reporting and how to communicate what's happening with the money, what your projects are, and how you're going to report back. So now we're mandating that our the financial team from each agency is going to train with FEMA to understand their processes, understand what they're looking for, so that in the event we get money again in the future, we understand how to report and that they're more willing to give because they trust us and they understand that we know the process and that we will report accordingly. Distribution of resources. The Prime Minister from St. Martin spoke a little bit about that. That was a very tough area for us to handle. We had money coming in from different places, but it wasn't getting to the people. All sorts of nonprofits were popping up and saying they're giving or they're collecting for us, but we realized at the end of the day, the money never got to the people, the resources never got to the people. So what we're going to ensure going forward is that we, the locals, manage all of the distribution. If you come in, you're going to have to register and work with a local. We're going to tie it to an agency where we have reports and we can monitor how the money funnels through the system so that we can thank who's supposed to be thanked, and we will understand really where our revenue streams are in the midst of emergencies. Alignment. When we have money, how do you determine what's the priority? We have the hospitals, we have the schools, we have the elderly, we have power. What we found, and this is afterwards, is that if we understood the mandates of the people that were giving and we tied our building to their mandates, we got more money. Meaning, if we, and I gave this example the other day when I was with the Prime Ministers, if we started a roof program, but we also added water catchment where we can also save water, capture water, we now got money for 2 projects, and they gave us even more because we were helping them meet a mandate for water conservation. So in your rebuilding, you have to think future. It's not just about fixing your roof, it's about fixing your roof and capturing water. It's not just about getting the schools back, it's getting the schools back where there are now safety zones in the event of a mass shooting. You're not just getting your hospital going, you're also getting your hospital where it's also a shelter for other islands to be able to bring their dialysis patients to your hospital as well. So every time we had a project, we checked their mandates to see what it matched, and we were able to get double or triple the money because we met them and we aligned ourselves well. Hazard mitigation. Whenever you cite a problem before a storm, you have to do your research and pocket it. For example, we have problems with our infrastructure with roads. When it rains, the water runs through the roads, runs through the neighborhoods, and so it tears up our roads. So we're constantly working on our roads. Since we cited that as a problem, we had to identify and research exactly how to fix it and then pocket that idea so that in the event of an emergency or a disaster and we got money, we knew exactly how to fix it, exactly what to do, and we weren't waiting at the last minute to figure it out. So even your engineers and your planners had to get involved in preparing for emergencies. We know we do not have the money now. We know we do not have the resources, but in the event the Army Corps of Engineers knocks on your door and says, what can we do? We had our top 5 infrastructure projects ready and written out, ready to go. Accountability. Now this is really where the powers of a senator comes in. What we found were that there were storm chasers and people who came in to tap into all the money that was going through the community. We had to protect our local vendors. They weren't getting paid. They weren't getting the jobs. They weren't getting the opportunities. So we had to bring those larger vendors who got contracts with FEMA or wherever through the mainland, however they got to us, and hold them accountable to ensure that they were doing the work correctly, up to standard, up to code, and getting the vendors paid. Because I saw this morning in the Washington Post that they captured where several of our vendors, local vendors, were complaining that they were not paid for work that was done. And we have millions and millions of dollars where the people come in, they do their repairs, they leave, they never pay our subcontractors, and so that becomes a problem. So we had to make sure we bring them before the Senate. Those that did not want to come, we subpoenaed them and publicized what they did. And they quickly stopped the practices and turned it around. But now they know in the event they have to deal with the Virgin Islands again, we are on top of them. So that's the accountability piece. So I just wanted to say that it's so many pieces and aspects and so many layers to rebuilding that there's also a political accountability side from your public servants and making sure we push legislation that is meaningful and purposeful, and that we are pushing policy that helps in rebuilding, not just to get us where we were, but to make sure we're ready for the future. Thank you so much. Questions? Am I supposed to ask? 2 questions. Any questions? Prime Minister?
Definitely relate. I've learned a few stuff. Just a quick question. You said you set monies aside that match the events. So is there a specific fund that is out there? Because that's something that we have started, but we haven't found where we're going to put the money is yet. Because we want to look for a growing fund.
Yes. So, we have a government insurance fund where we put money for insurance, unemployment insurance, workman's comp insurance. We started a CDBGR, which is a fund for disaster recovery, and we put a person over it. She manages that entire division. So whenever we have capital projects or money coming in, and that entity would allow us to tap in, through legislation, we're going to put what the percentage is, and that money is going to go to that area, and it's managed, and it's accountable to the Senate and our appropriations. So in the event of an emergency, the Senate will determine how we're going to appropriate that money.
Hi, good day. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I know that the infrastructural needs are really, really important. But now that you said, now what? What is the Senate or the Parliament as a whole, the legislature, what is being done currently to cater for the psychological trauma and the psychological impacts of the disaster? Are there funds for that as well?
Yes, so what we have is, the thing is, you get money when you have data. If you're able to drive data, and we were capturing how many students were irritable in school and the performance rates dropped, or absences at work, or a person that was normally performing at a certain level and no longer performing, then we would be able to zone in more on the psychological effects. And because we did not do a good job on data, capturing data, it became a case-by-case basis. So what we did was we asked each agency to stop, use their human resources department, and work with our counselors and our EPA program to deal with those people that had those psychological issues and lapses. But I think as we move forward, when we ask what next, we will definitely be considering funding just for mental health and the overall wellness of our residents. Thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you, Alison. Next, perspective from Puerto Rico, Beatrice.
Good morning, everyone here, and those of you watching this online. I know people from back home are watching, so hi. It's actually quite very difficult to do this. Try to report on on your country after the 2017 hurricanes. And to report briefly, but to be sufficiently thorough while at the same time honor the deep trauma that this has meant, and to honor also the fact that this trauma is not ahistorical. This is a thoroughly historical trauma that just gets repeated and amplified by this phenomena. It's not something that we just, we're okay and then a hurricane hits and we fall apart. It's that we've been in this region, we've been made to fall apart for centuries. And it's really important that we all remember that these phenomena are less natural in a region like ours than they are historical, political, and economic. The magnitude of these storms right now, we know from scientific research, is the result of very long centuries of actions that we haven't taken, but we bear the biggest brunt and the most dire consequences. Also, the magnitude of the impact of these phenomena in colonized, subjugated, exploited regions in the entire world, be it hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, etc. The magnitude of the impact is also amplified by our historical condition. So what I can say, just to sort of set out my brief report, is that I don't want Puerto Rico to be open for business. It's been open for business for centuries. I want it to be open for justice. Okay, so I wrote something in order to be able to do this because it's very brief and like I said, it's emotionally difficult to do it. So I wrote something in order to get the ideas across, and it's rather brief. But I think it's important to just give a little bit of context, like I said, historical context, specifically concerning Puerto Rico, and a lot of this, of course, is shared by the entire region, but because of Puerto Rico's and actually the U.S. Virgin Islands' so-called relationship with the United States, there are things that are different, really, to other countries in the Caribbean. So, like you all know, and like many countries in the global south, Puerto Rico is right now shouldering the burden of the undemocratic policies of neoliberal capitalism. I found it very important, what the senator talked about at the end concerning accountability. We're calling it disaster porno in Puerto Rico. We've had a lot of that. Just people exploiting for business the disaster. As an ideology of privatization, government deregulation, and endlessly increasing debt, neoliberalism is at once the motor, but at the same time the proposed savior of the current humanitarian and fiscal crisis in the country. By implementing so-called austerity measures, it claims to save us from fiscal collapse while in fact deepening the ecological tragedy and broadening the abyss between the minority who control most of the global wealth and an increasingly precarious majority whose bodies are ever more indebted, insecure, and denied access to basic resources. Just a couple of quantitative data for you to get a sense of this in Puerto Rico. Between 2005 and 2015, the debt of Puerto Rico grew by 80%. It has compromised our entire gross domestic product, and it's right now over $70 billion of debt that we are facing of an unpayable debt. But they're making us pay anyway. We've also lost in the same period between 2005 and 2015 close to 184,000 jobs. Puerto Rico's status as a colony of the United States since 1898 has also enabled an unprecedented acceleration of this regressive dynamic. The crassest expression of Puerto Rico's colonial subjugation right now is undoubtedly the 2016 Promesa law, You know, promesa means, so even the name was on purpose. With its fiscal oversight and management board, we call it La Junta in Puerto Rico, becoming the de facto government of the country and determining the paths to recovery from the crisis, while in effect intensifying it. I'm going to give you a few examples of why I say it's actually intensifying the crisis. The junta has spearheaded an assault on the University of Puerto Rico, which is experiencing a reduction of half of its operating budget. It's the public university, the only public university in the country. While students confront disproportionate tuition hikes, we've already lost an incalculable amount of students who just cannot pay what the university is being forced to request. It has also taken measures to protect and expand tax exemptions for private corporations. It has encouraged, with the collaboration of the local government, a so-called labor reform that brings the country back to labor conditions akin to those of the 19th century. It has taken decisions to undermine local credit unions. The cooperativas in Puerto Rico are a very important and alternative mode of organizing the economy, but they have taken over the cooperativas in favor of commercial banks. The junta has also supported the overhaul of the public education system by means of privatization, especially with the charter school system. And if you look up what has happened with that in New Orleans after Katrina, you'll get a sense of why this is a really big problem. It has also stimulated the so-called flexibilization of environmental laws, now that we need exactly the opposite. And it has also supported efforts to privatize public corporations, such as the Public Energy Corporation in the country. Since the hurricanes in 2017, neither the FOM, the board, nor the local government, which is also a disaster, have deviated from this organized neoliberal plan for the remaking of Puerto Rico's economy to suit the interests of private and foreign entities. Rather, they have cynically capitalized on the dramatic suffering and trauma of everyday Puerto Ricans. A recent study concluded that 97 people were forced to flee the country after the hurricanes, many of whom haven't been able to return. And we know that approximately 3,000 people died, not in the day or the days of the hurricanes, but actually in the following weeks, precisely because the management was even more disastrous than the disaster. There are a lot of people still living under blue tarps, and we had most of the country without electricity for months after the hurricane, and the most fragile regions are having blackouts constantly, with all the consequences of that. Since Maria, we've lost over 31,000 jobs on top of the previous number that I had given you, and right now unemployment is at 8%, and labor force participation is at 40%. In the midst of this dire situation, and now I want to say, that's kind of like the sort of institutional, historical, political situation, but now I just want to say a few words about what actual Puerto Ricans on the ground are doing. I believe they are actually illuminating the way, or we are trying to illuminate the way toward another and better country. As it has been amply documented, most of the impoverished people's needs were actually covered right after the hurricane. And until today, through comunitarian autogestión, this is a difficult word in Spanish to translate, but it's something like autonomous self-organization. Autogestión, which is amplified through effective and material solidarity networks, are organized and deployed at the margins of both the local and federal government apparatuses, as well as independently from the multinational corporations that, through massive tax exemptions and precarious labor laws, have come to control Puerto Rico's dependent economy. Moreover, recent phenomena confirm the creation of new public spaces and democratic imaginaries for thinking anew the question of a decolonial future for the country. And this has been, I think, a result of having to be faced with the hugest bubble bursting, right? That we were okay and that the status as a so-called Commonwealth of the US was actually beneficial. Well, now it's, you know, it's really impossible to entertain that idea anymore, that a lot of people in Puerto Rico used to entertain. So I think this is very, very important. I'm gonna just name, and with this I finish, a couple of these initiatives that autogestión initiatives that I think are very important and in which I am very deeply committed. So first, there are numerous ecological struggles being undertaken right now, and they're contesting corporate-led contamination and irresponsible developments in communities such as Tallaboa, Peñuelas. I can tell you more about this later if you'd like, and Playuela in the town of Aguadilla, alongside a significant rise in agroecological projects. Second, we have really increasing support for clean solar energy and its independence from private or privatized corporations, especially around the work of Casa Pueblo in Adjuntas in the mountains and Idebajo in the southern and in the southeastern coast of the main island. Third, there is significant, ever-increasing opposition to the junta from multiple social justice and feminist organizations such as Junte Gente, Dignidad, and the Colectiva Feminista en Construcción. Fourth, there's mounting support for a citizen-led, transparent debt audit because they've refused to audit the debt. That would also bring the guilty parties to justice. And this is exemplified by the extraordinary work of the Frente Ciudadano por la Auditoría de la Deuda. 5, there's continual struggle in defense of public and accessible education, both at the school and university levels. Very important work being done by the Federación de Maestras y Maestros de Puerto Rico. And 6, the vibrant resurgence of street and independent art, theater, and performance, which I think is crucial for any sense of a future. With such collectives as Papel Machete, Vuelta Abajo Colectivo, and Bemba PR, which are doing really amazing work, community work. Characterized also by autogestión, these movements have been shaping profound and diverse sovereignties that I believe constitute routes toward decolonization outside of the established institutional frameworks, which have in many ways led to the crisis and repeatedly betrayed Puerto Rican communities. I will just add to finish that we have to do a much better work in Puerto Rico to connect with the region. And I actually was talking about this in my presentation yesterday. So I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to be here and to be able to share this space with all of you. I've already met really amazing people here, and I look forward to more of this in the future. Thank you. Questions?
Hello. Oh, I think it's working now. I heard a lot about Casa Pueblo, and I think it's an amazing project. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on the new bill that was recently put forward. It seems like the Puerto Rican government is really getting behind renewable energy, and obviously there's huge issues there with the utility and trying to get the investment and really get all these things in a row to have reliable energy in the future. So I don't know if you followed the new bill that came in on Monday, but it seems like that could be a really empowering move for Puerto Ricans. And so you know, if you have any thoughts on that, that'd be great. But then also with the Casa Pueblo model, it's got a lot of press, but it's obviously quite small scale. And I'm wondering if you see any potential for that model to be replicated in other communities, or if that's already happening as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a great question. I can answer more with actual knowledge your second question. The first question, this happened this week while I was here, the signing of this bill. I haven't been able to read it. I don't have a regular internet connection here, just when I'm here, but I'm here in the conference. So I would like to read it before I can actually say something about it. I don't want to be unfair to it. But from what I've heard, I mean, it's of course a welcome and sorely needed initiative. But I need to read it and I need to see, because the current ruling party in the country is terrible. So my first reaction to something they come up with is I need to read it and be very careful about what they're doing, because they have all of these, they've had this trajectory of disaster porno that I was talking about. So I want to make sure, for instance, they've opposed historically Casa Pueblo, because Casa Pueblo is not a recent organization. It's been active in the country for decades, and it has a long history of environmental struggles. This is the same party, this PNP party is the same party that wanted to make a gasoducto that would have basically destroyed natural resources that were protected from a very important ecological region in the main island. And it was Casa Pueblo that led the opposition to that, over 10 years ago, and actually managed to stop the project. So it's a really, apparently a big change for this party to actually now be advocating for clean energy. So I would like to read the bill before I can actually say something substantial about it. It did. No, I saw that. I just saw that it passed. I saw it this week, but I haven't read it. I don't recall from before coming here that they put it up for a lot of public debate, so I haven't been able to read it. But I will, and after I do, I feel like it would be more fair to actually talk about its contents. Concerning Casa Pueblo, like I said, I sort of said it. It's been there for a long time, and it's had extraordinary successes and very important ones. But I think right now, after the hurricanes, they are the main organization pushing for solar energy rather than coming from the government. This has been a very recent development, this bill. And actually one of the main leaders of Casa Pueblo was recently, I'm not gonna, it'll take forever to explain. So let me not do that. But so they've already been able to install multiple solar systems in multiple houses, but also local businesses in and around the town where Casa Pueblo is located. So I think they are well underway in replicating what they've been doing in Juntas for, like I said, already a long time. So yes, the answer is yes.
Bridget, thanks a great deal for your interest in and critical analysis. And you spoke a lot about the junta. Who was responsible for initiating and implementing the junta? Was that the local government or was that the United States?
The Barack
government?
Obama presidency.
The local government. Is it? The local government? Was this?
The Barack Obama presidency.
Oh, the American.
In 2016.
And what was the objective? What is the objective of having the junta?
Well, it was touted as the institution that would come into Puerto Rico and would bring the local party's corruption to accountability. Nothing has happened on that front after 3 years. Not one local politician has been investigated or brought to justice at all for anything at all. That's one thing. It was also touted as that which would solve the debt crisis. Like I just explained, it's really, really serious. But the decisions that they've taken, like I tried to summarize, have actually deepened the crisis for the majority of Puerto Ricans rather than providing any solution. So it was it was publicized as our solution. 7 people were going to come in. It's composed of 7 people. They were going to come in, and they were just going to save us. I mean, that's the only way I can summarize it very quickly. They were going to save us, but they've actually they've made it a lot worse, and they haven't held accountable either the local government, which I'm not excusing at all. It's been historically also really, really problematic and corrupt from both main parties. So,
sort of mini World Bank, is it?
Huh?
Sort of mini World Bank?
Well, they don't even they don't even have funds. That's it. Okay.
Thank you so much. And there will be time at the end for further comments and questions. And finally, we have Achen.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bon dia, damas y caballeros. My name is Arjen Alberts. I'm a resident of St. Martin, and also, interestingly, a former resident of Aruba, and actually a former lecturer at this beautiful university as well. It was the start of my career in the Caribbean. Yeah, my PowerPoint is up. So, like I said, I'm a resident of St. Martin. I have to do this little disclaimer at the outset, because I'm also a civil servant in St. Martin, but you'll see me here in a different quality as a researcher. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam, studying the tourism-driven development models of Aruba and St. Martin. Well, needless to say, I was there when the storm hit as well, as you might have expected. So I will try to make some additional remarks and skip over the parts that you already heard today. So if it comes across a little disjointed, it's because I hop over the parts that you already heard, right? So I'm eternally grateful to our Prime Minister, who is sitting in the back, for her brilliant speech earlier this morning. That was at once heartwarming, heartbreaking, and uplifting all at the same time. So I will, I will not even try to top that or anything. I will just make some additional remarks, like I said, and maybe a bit more analysis-oriented, right? Being a researcher and, hit on some buttons that we didn't see yet. Let me see how this works. Just press the right side. No? This one? Yeah. Okay, I'm assuming that everybody knows where St. Martin is. Okay, this slide is a depiction of the structure of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I will not try to go into all the details, but the relevance of this is, this is the only part that I'm going to actually duplicate, which is the difference in reaction to the storm, to the disaster, the difference between how Aruba and Curacao reacted, which was from the heart, immediate and unconditional, and also, relatively small scale. But they were there like even before the storm hit. We got police assistance from Curacao and Aruba. Like the Prime Minister mentioned, our kidney dialysis patients were flown out immediately to Aruba as well. So this in contrast to the Netherlands, whose reaction was massive, somewhat delayed, and very conditional, and also very rational, as opposed to the more from the heart approach from our sister islands. So we'll get more into that later as well. So the details about the hurricane itself I will spare you. It was indeed the most forceful hurricane on record in the Atlantic Basin, and it hit us spot on, bullseye, both ends of the eye wall, which is the most force, raised the island from top to bottom, or from east to west rather. Okay, it's almost impossible to quantify the damage, right? But it's nevertheless, attempts were done at quantifying, and the number that is used is 2.3 billion, of course, dollars, sorry, you know, spread out over different sectors, as you will see. Now there's a little difference between damage and losses, right? Damage is what's really broken, and losses is, for instance, when a business doesn't operate and can't make revenue, that's a loss, right? So both, of course, happened. And of course, the backbone of the Sint Maarten economy is the tourism sector, very similar to Aruba, for that matter. And one takeaway from that, I'll try to focus on the takeaways. One takeaway from that is indeed the difference in which, you know, several hotels were hit or not hit so much. So you would have two hotels standing side by side, and one is totally destroyed and the other is almost operating as normal. And that's not because of the storm, but because of the way they are built, right? So, you know, that may not be an indication of a violation of a building code at all, right? Both are probably compliant with the building codes, but we should think and take away the lesson that we should construct with an eye on, you know, a possible future hurricane. Much in the same way as the design of the new hospital. The new hospital project was already underway before Irma, and the design was adapted. Because obviously, you know, would we follow the existing design, the pre-Irma design was fine with the knowledge of that moment, right? But from the standpoint of resilience, the design is now adapted. Funds of the World Bank have been allocated to actually modify the design and finance the stronger structure that will now in place so that it will withstand the possible future 5+ hurricanes as well. Same thing with actually the airport. Very beautiful building, but maybe a little too beautiful because not resistant to the storm that we had. So also a takeaway, right? So design, you know, however compliant to the building code, maybe the building code should change as well. That's a, you know, another conversation. But the point is just think ahead and design into future disasters. So, how is the recovery financed? Right, just a quick overview. I will point out a few things that have not been mentioned so much yet. Right? Of course, there's another takeaway, another difference is between those entities insured and those not insured. Private dwellings may or may not have been insured. Companies, businesses may or may not have been insured. So one takeaway is to increase the consciousness and awareness about the importance of insurance. It sounds like a simple thing, but a lot of tragedy after the disaster can be prevented that way, right? So actually the payouts from insurance companies, they, well, again, estimates, right? But they approach $500 million potentially as well, which is not quite as large as the Dutch aid, but in the same ballpark, right? So if that number would be higher, because more people actually do insure, usually on most of our islands, most parties insured are insured because they have to, right? Because they have a mortgage and it's a kind of very mandatory, right? Same thing with businesses, right? But there's a gap of those people who build very Caribbean, you know, those people who build their own house gradually by extending a bit here and there, right? Without taking out a loan. And they are usually the parties that don't have insurance and are hit the hardest. One thing I want to mention, another takeaway, business reserves. A lot of businesses in Sint Maarten actually kept on their employees without actually generating any revenue in the months after Irma, right? So there's an implicit kind of unemployment benefit because we don't have a formal unemployment benefit in Sint Maarten. So I was very interested to hear that, you know, one of the takeaways in the Virgin Islands is to actually create such a thing. So businesses kept on their employees to a certain extent, sometimes at reduced hours, but in any case better than no employment and no income at all. Leading as well to a sort of delayed effect, because the social economic effects were at first a little underestimated, because, you know, unemployment didn't appear immediately because they were kept on and then fired when the reserves of the businesses were depleted, right? So you see, even in 2018, you saw the number of unemployed actually increasing, where you know, whereas on the other hand, you see in the construction sector booming, right? So you have the unemployed trickling out of the hospitality sector, and then, but those are not necessarily the same people, right? Those becoming unemployed from the hospitality don't fit into the construction sector, where you don't give the cook a hammer and say, okay, go fix a roof, right? So that's another takeaway. So some of the projects that we're running right now in St. Martin are actually schooling people to become, you know, construction workers and other menial labor to fit in. So, business reserves, financing through local sources, foreign investments. The government budget, well, the government is in financial trouble itself, so there's not a lot of relief from there. So whatever relief through government is usually funded by the Dutch funds as well. Now, leading me to the bottom right-hand corner, right, that was mentioned earlier. The Netherlands allocated a sum of 550 million euros, so over €500 million to the recovery of St. Martin, of which 470 million, it was mentioned earlier, was put in a trust fund managed by the World Bank. And one of the questions this morning was, why the World Bank? Right? To which the answer was, yeah, you have to ask the Dutch. Well, I had the privilege to ask the Dutch, actually. And, you know, this is, again, a takeaway, right? A takeaway of unpreparedness, institutional unpreparedness, also on the side of the Dutch. Because there is no reason for the World Bank. It's just sheer panic, right? The background is that, you know, there's a somewhat tenuous relationship between different parties in the kingdom. So the Dutch institutions, Dutch government don't necessarily trust the St. Martin government altogether in all aspects. So there's question marks there. So, you know, a lot of discussion about integrity and this and that. And on the other hand, you have a heavy discussion about neo-colonial attitudes from the Dutch, rightly so. Right? So what the Dutch did is, you know, wildly looking for a party to actually park the funds and manage the funds. And you have to understand that from the Dutch point of view, the relations within the kingdom fall under the Ministry of the Interior, so the Interior and Kingdom relations. They don't necessarily have a lot of expertise in aid or, you know, recovery aid or development aid for that matter. So that's foreign affairs, right? So what happened is that the Minister of the Interior called foreign affairs. What do? We need to park all this money somewhere, and who should we enlist to manage that? So they said, oh, well, look at the World Bank, right? They do stuff. Okay, we'll take the World Bank. You know, there was not even an attempt to analyze it a little, for instance. And it was totally unprepared as well. So there was no scenario, no draaiboek, as we say in Dutch, beautiful, untranslatable word. There was no protocol in place what to do if one of the kingdom partners is struck by a heavy disaster. How do we channel that? How do we parcel it out? You know, you might imagine that, for instance, immediate small-scale social projects with that have to be executed fast. You know, you could enlist one of the Oxfams of this world to do that kind of project, sorry. World Bank is very good at constructing highways and, you know, harbors and dams and, you know, huge infrastructural projects. So give them to the World Bank, but not the small stuff that now gets overloaded by World Bank procedure and bureaucracy. That's layers upon layers with a heavy emphasis on procurement process, which is fine and dandy when you're constructing a highway, right? But for small-scale immediate needs, it's grinding it to a halt. So that's a takeaway. It's just a lack of preparedness, but not from St. Martin so much as from the biggest kingdom partner. So the money is there, but it's, you know, it's not channeled right. So, what happened on St. Martin itself? National Recovery and Resilience Plan. So, another takeaway. So, already almost a year ago, a plan was formulated, of course, in cooperation with the donors, trying to take inventory of all the needs and looking ahead at the projects that should take place to recover and to reconstruct, right? So that's the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. Rightly, it was mentioned before, building back better is kind of the central theme, just not reconstructing to the old situation, but trying to reconstruct, anticipating, possible future disasters, so you're better prepared, right? In terms of resilience discussion, right? Because resilience is not just being less vulnerable so much, right? Not resisting the blow, just resisting the blow better, but also recovering faster, right? So bouncing back, but also bouncing forward, right? So while you are recovering, get to a better place from which you are better prepared for what happens next. Okay. Two more things. Let me skip. Yeah. Okay. With respect to the World Bank, right? It was mentioned before by the Prime Minister as well. There's a few projects underway, and we are a year and a half after Irma. So you might wish that this list was actually longer. And the top 3 that are now in execution, it's not entirely fair because there's a whole lot of projects in the pipeline that will roll out pretty soon. But they were actually projects that were, before the World Bank came on board, were already in some stage of execution, and they were brought under the umbrella, right? So for instance, the middle one, the Emergency Income Support and Training Projects, is actually an initiative of a couple of big hotels that took the initiative to keep their employees occupied and give them training while the hotel was reconstructed. So that is actually more of a bottom-up thing that was later adopted by World Bank and supported by World Bank funding. Excellent initiative, by the way. But also pointing out another takeaway, we don't have a formal unemployment benefit arrangement. Not even in disaster situations. And that brings me to the last point, which I call institutional preparedness, right? So the best way to explain it is that we can declare a state of emergency, right? For the immediate aftermath and law and order and all that stuff, but we can't really declare a state of recovery. And why am I saying that? Because what we found out in the recovery phase is that the laws are sometimes in our way. The laws don't permit a lot of things that you want to do after a disaster. The law doesn't permit you to hand out, for instance, food vouchers. We had to push and shove to get that somewhere legally done, right? You want to, after the first physical aid has been distributed, you want to distribute food vouchers for people to actually go and buy stuff, those who need it. Go and buy stuff in the supermarket who have by that time opened again, right? As a phase. There is no regulation in any law that permits the government to do that. We don't have a folder that we can pull off a shelf with recovery measures that would be in place temporarily, like you have in a state of emergency for law and order stuff. We don't have that. Nobody does, actually. It's something that needs to be developed. Yeah? So institutional preparedness, next to our physical preparedness, which is kind of obvious and everybody can see that, right? and what is usually identified when you talk about resilience, but we have very little institutional preparedness. I mentioned the Dutch side, right, where they were fully unprepared to roll out any scenario of how to come to the aid of St. Martin, but on St. Martin itself too. There's no provisional law book that is temporarily in force to facilitate those needs. Okay, that was pretty much my presentation. Thank you.
We do have a few minutes for any further reflections from the floor and questions too. So perhaps we can start at the front and work back.
Thanks, Ariane. Jim Randall here. From a researcher perspective, from a humanitarian perspective, I'm glad this didn't happen. But I want you to see if you can answer a hypothetical question. This conference is looking at how governance might operate differently given a certain situation. And I noticed your one slide there that looked at the relationship between, for example, St. Martin to the Netherlands. And then within that one oval you had, of course, Bonaire and Saba, etc. Thank God none of those were hit to the same extent that the others were. But just if you could think, sort of, if one of those islands had been hit, what would the relationship, what would the response have been? Because it's a different kind of governance relationship to the Netherlands from the governance relationship that it has with St. Martin and Aruba or Curacao. So this is all hypothetical, but that's the purpose of, one of the purposes of this conference is, those are different governance relationships. So if Bonaire had been hit, or Saba had been hit, can you think of how the governance relationships that they have with the Netherlands might have been different from the governance relationships that St. Martin has with it? So as I say, it's hypothetical, but it's interesting to speculate how those governance relationships might have produced different outcomes.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Jim. It's not all that hypothetical because Saba and Statia were actually hit. Not quite as hard, fortunately, as for them as St. Martin. But they are integral part of the Netherlands with a municipal-like government. And so the responsibility is entirely for the Dutch government in the European part of the kingdom to take up any reconstruction, and so there's no question there. But the damage was to a far less extent than St. Martin, obviously. So actually your case study is right there. Yeah, and it's progressing. Yeah. Any other? Oh.
So my name is Simran Singh. I'm from University of Waterloo in Canada. And this is more an observation rather than a question. First, thank you very much for sharing these very difficult stories. And I could sense your anger and your disappointment as you tell those, and this is definitely not easy. I've spent more than 10 years, almost 15 years in the post-tsunami recovery process in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and very, very closely. And it was not easy to tell these stories for the first 5-10 years, and now I'm much better at telling them, so it takes time. So what I've observed there, and I also see from your cases, is so the tsunami was devastating for the Nicobars, and that was really bad, but what was worse was the aid that came afterwards, and that caused more damage than the physical, that was there definitely, but, and you were talking about the breakdown of institutions, for example. So this was kind of far worse when you have institutional breakdown, cultural, social, also political, where people become so dependent, and I made a lot of mess. And so I'm just sharing this because I'm sure we can have a richer conversation offline as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arjen. Very interesting. I'm wondering now with this World Bank again, is there a way of turning it back? Because I heard also that the World Bank asked 1/3 of the money for their own.
No.
No,
That
that's
is
not- that's not
absolutely
true.
not
Okay.
true. No. There is a percentage that they normally calculate for overhead, and actually that percentage, the Prime Minister can give you the exact number, that has been negotiated down considerably from the normal level. I don't have the exact number in my head right now, but I think it's normally around 17 or 19%, something like that. No? Then it's negotiated down considerably, but for each project, okay, yeah. But out of the total sum, anyway, there's an overhead percentage, and it's moderate, more moderate than in other cases, yeah.
Yeah, but the World Bank has this lot of examples everywhere, and what is their contact then with the population to have this interaction, more or less? Yeah, the Prime Minister
well,
told already.
that's the National Recovery Bureau.
Yeah.
So that is the link between the World Bank on the one hand and also the government, because it's actually a tripartite thing, right? And then there's actually a tripartite committee that governs the program bureau. And so one seat for the Netherlands, one seat for St. Martin, and one from the World Bank, that have to approve every project unanimously before it enters the program bureau, where it's then worked out with the local parties, or mainly the government and other local parties, to execute and realize it. That's
There's no idea of turning it back.
I can't speculate on that. That's beyond what I can view. Yeah.
We have time for 2 more questions. So,
thank you very much for your explanation. My name is Birgit Krijkenboom. I'm currently working at the University of Aruba, but before that I worked for the Aruban government as a civil servant. I heard you talking about preparedness on both sides, the island of St. Martin government, but also the Dutch government side. And I was wondering, this is a disaster situation, but a lot of that has been spoken today, also the Prime Minister from St. Martin this morning, and the initiative between the 3 governments, or the Prime Ministers from the autonomous states. Yeah. I was wondering, because I think a lot of the unpreparedness on the Dutch side also has to do that they don't have the experiences of local officials. And I mean political, but also the civil servants. And a lot of the discourse that I hear, I think maybe the initiative between the 3 prime ministers could, well, be a way out. I think the Dutch government needs to know, and civil servants from the Dutch government, what it means to be on an island and what it means. And I think what the senator also said this morning, training to learn kind of the language, for example, of FEMA, and be prepared to fill their needs in, for example, reporting. That is what you said, right? And that is often what I see happening as well between civil servants on this side of the Dutch kingdom and the other side. And I'm wondering, have you any experience with that?
Yeah,
learning.
Well, I've been in the civil service in Aruba and St. Martin, and actually very much in interaction with Holland, and it's excruciating. I mean, every time you have a Dutch civil servant who gets familiar with the islands, he or she is rotated back again, and you lose all that expertise, and it's really hard. So yes, some institutional memory and some, that would be really nice in that relationship. It's not for lack of trying, it's just, yeah.
I guess I have the last one. Going back to the World Bank issue and the financing issue in general, I think it's a very critical issue. It's a critical issue because it's defining what is going on right now, and it will define for the next decade or so the course of action of St. Martin. In addition to deciding on project eligibility by this tripartite commission, I assume, and I hope, in fact, that there is a monitoring mechanism in place. If there is a monitoring mechanism in place, there should be space to periodically evaluate. So you have results flowing out of a periodic evaluation. What is done with that? Because I feel that a lot is going wrong. We're getting on a wrong track consistently. So what is happening in terms of feeding back to the owners of the fund? What's going on? And taking corrective actions?
Well, the process only just started, so I can't tell you what will happen with that feedback. Of course, knowing the World Bank and knowing the Netherlands, the mechanisms are in place for evaluation and feedback. And I hope, I can only, connecting to the earlier question, I can only hope that, what we said earlier, maybe channeling, because it's never too late, right? So if different channels are found to sub-partition maybe part of the fund to, for more practical, lower level outlets to do smaller projects, but I'm speculating now, so that I would hope that